Hey, welcome back to this study of Joshua. This is Allen. I'm Josh, and today we're looking at Joshua chapter 15. As we have with previous episodes, if you haven't had an opportunity to read this chapter, take a minute, hit the pause button, read the chapter, and then join us as we begin our study. And if you're new and this is the first time that you've tuned in to this study, I would encourage you to go back to the beginning, the introduction, and watch it all the way through just to build the foundation and catch up with us. But we are so glad you're here. How you doing, Allen?
Doing well. How are you?
Again, enjoying this study. Looking forward to another one on the chapter. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, let's dive into chapter 15. We're in the section of the book where the inheritances are being doled out. The instructions for doling out the inheritances was chapter 13. Chapter 14 we just covered began the allotments west of the Jordan. Mm-hmm. And those go from 14 through 19. So that's the section that we're in here through chapter 19. We'll get to 20 cities of refuge, 21 cities of the Levites, and 22, those east of the Jordan will get there. So I can put it on the screen real quick on just the structure of the book. So we have covered the first 5, which is east of the Jordan. Mm-hmm. Then we covered 6 through 12, which was west of the Jordan, and those are the battlefield chapters. And now we're in the section where they're colonizing, and they're on both sides of the river now. And then there'll be the final section, 22 to 24, which is serving in the land. So we're in the third section of the book, which is the longest section, 13 through 21. Now we go back to 15 and pick up with the keys to the chapter. We call this chapter, "You Can Have My Daughter," because that's the offer that Caleb makes to any soldier that can conquer Kirjath Sepher, which means city of the book. And Othniel is the one who conquers the city, and he becomes son-in-law to Caleb. So that's a unique story in the book, or in this chapter, that I think is memorable and also teaches some lessons for us. You can have my daughter. The key verse is 16, 15, 16. And Caleb said, "He that smiteth Kirjath Sepher and taketh it, to him will I give Achsah, my daughter, to wife." The key thought of the book, of the chapter rather, is the last verse. Winning many victories is good. And there are a lot of cities that were taken that are in those verses up through verse 62. But then verse 63, there's a but. They were not able to drive out those in Jerusalem or Jerusalem. So winning many victories is good, but one defeat can sour them. Right. One defeat. So we're going to see that at the end of the chapter. But there are a lot of positive lessons to be learned, and I guess that's a positive lesson if you learn what not to do by that, or how to be careful not to let your guard down. Now, so the title, the key verse, and the key thought. Then the outline. This is the longest chapter of the book of Joshua, 63 verses, but there are only 4 sections here. So it's not jumping around from one episode or story or event. It's a lot of it is just covering the boundaries of Judah, where they are.
Right.
So here's the outline. 1 to 12, Judah's borders. 13 to 19, Caleb's victory. That's my favorite part of this chapter. 20 to 62, the largest section, Judah's cities. So the borders, 1 to 12, and then the cities within the borders, 20 to 62, and then Judah's failure, verse 63. Now, we're not going to read all 63 verses here, but we are going to excerpt from it the key verses, the best verses to learn from. But I do want to allow those who are marking their Bibles to see verse 1. This then was a lot of the tribe of the children of Judah. So put a box or in some way note Judah. I'm using an orange box in my Bible for these allotments. So you see each one, there's Judah in chapter 15. When we get over to chapter 16, it's Ephraim in verse 4. In chapter 17, it's Manasseh in verse 1. Use the same color as we go through each chapter. And then it's easy to pick those out at a glance later. So the tribe of the children of Judah by their families, even to the border of Edom, the wilderness of Zin southward was the uttermost part of the south coast. Now, I have a map just to get our bearings. So you have in the north, toward the north, the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River runs down through that valley and ends in the Dead Sea, the lowest body of water on earth. And so they've come in from the east side of the Jordan River. They're heading west, and they've conquered central, south, and north, and now they're dividing the land. So you have the children of Judah are getting the choice property. They're getting the best part of the land. And Judah always gets first choice. God always starts with Judah. That's his leadership tribe. Now, on the map on the screen, you see how large a section that Judah received. Now, Simeon is going to receive a smaller section within the borders of Judah, and it's down toward the south. I have another map here that shows that a little more clearly. So the green is Judah, and then the yellow is Simeon, which is there in the within the borders. And these two tribes are really close, and they fight together. And they agreed to that earlier. They supported each other in conquering. Now, I'm not going to read the next section because it's just going through the borders, and really you can see that on the map without having to try to trace all those cities. Their property goes down to the parched area, the southern section, the area that we're going to talk about a little bit later when you have Caleb's daughter that says, I need some springs, I need some water because you put me down here where there's no water. So, and then it goes all the way parallel with the Dead Sea on the western side and even up pretty much even with it, even with the top of the Dead Sea, a large area. So that's what the first 12 verses cover is those borders.
Right.
And the border is more defined. It's more of a straight line or a curve. In the south, it's more ragged on the north, and that's hill country through here. So that makes part of the reason for it. All right, now I'm going to go back over just noticing the the outline again. We've covered the first 12 verses pretty quickly. Now I want to go into this middle section, next section 13 through 19. And I do want to read that because we're going to take most of our lessons for the chapter from verses 13 through 19. So I'll pick up in 13. And unto Caleb the son of Jephunneh, he gave a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord, to Joshua, even the city of Arba, the father of Anak. Now, if you're familiar with Old Testament terminology, you know that the Anakims were giants in the land, and they were fierce warriors. And so you have Caleb being given the city of Hebron, also called Kirjath Arba, and they were of the lineage of the giants. So this is not going to be an easy city to take.
Right.
Now, in the previous chapter, Joshua 14, we had Caleb coming to Joshua and reminding him about Moses' promise and that he had been 40 years old and he had to wait for 45 years, but now give me this mountain. And this is the mountain that he requested and he is awarded, but this mountain is not easy, an easy picking. It's going to take a good warrior, and we'll see that. Let me read this, and then I know you will have some comments about this, but I want to see verse 14. And Caleb drove thence the three sons of Anak. So he didn't have to be just one giant, but three of them. And their names are Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. Now, Anak. And so I made a note in my Bible, 3 giants beaten by an 85-year-old man. You know, this guy, one man versus a giant would be a challenge. One man versus 3 giants, a greater challenge. An 85-year-old man against 3 giants. Wow. And yet God awards him the victory. You know, he's capable. Now, it wasn't Caleb just fighting, by himself. He's leading his men in the battle. But even at that, an 85-year-old man on a battlefield at all is pretty unusual. Of course, we do take in mind they lived a little longer in those days. Joshua was going to live to be 110. Still, that's within the realm of possibility today, but not common at all. 85, pretty common, but not to be on a battlefield.
Right. Well, and the other thing, he's the patriarch of this group that he's taken in. He is the oldest.
That's right.
And it serves as motivation. I think, we've talked about it in this study before. Those who are older, the responsibility and the benefit they have to the church. Yes. And part of this, you just think of it, I just think of myself on the battlefield, and you see this 85-year-old man leading the charge to take it.
Pretty inspirational.
And I don't want to, downgrade what Caleb did, but it's kind of one of those, if he can do it, what am I doing?
Why can't I?
And so, same thing in the church. When you look to older members who are taking the charge and contributing, then as someone who's younger looks at them, if they're doing it, then I should be doing it as well. So, age is and
they haven't put themselves out to pasture.
Right.
Sometimes someone will take an attitude. Well, I've done my duty. It's your turn to take your turn. Well, we do have a retirement plan in the church, but it's not on earth.
Good point.
As long as we have health and opportunity, we continue to serve until we're called home, and then that's where we have our rest. Revelation 14,
absolutely,
13,
absolutely.
Let me go into 15. And he went up thence to the inhabitants of Debir, and the name of Debir was before Kirjath Sepher. Now, we've seen Kirjath Sepher before, but I wanted to draw out a lesson or two before we get into the section where Othniel fights for that city. The first lesson that we will observe in Joshua 15 is Caleb is the real giant. I don't know how tall Caleb was. I don't know his weight. I don't know how muscular his build was. But in a spiritual sense, Caleb has always been a giant. Since we first got to know him, way back in Numbers 13, he came back saying, we're well able to defeat these giants. They're easy pickings for God. And as long as we are on the side of right, then we'll win. Of course, he was not able to persuade all the people of that, but he showed his faith, the faith of a giant, way back 45 years earlier. And then we see that he hadn't lost his spunk in the previous chapter, Joshua 14. Give me this mountain. He still has a giant faith. He's not saying, well, my time's passed. I won't be able to ever enjoy what I wanted. No, he still has that faith. And then here, the giant, he may have been, must have been smaller in stature than the three sons of Anak, but it's not always how big you are,
right?
That wins the battle. In this case, those giants fail. So Caleb is the real giant, and I think that's inspirational to us. We may not have all the advantages, good looks, or a strong build, or good health, or there's a lot of things that we don't have choice about that may be our situation, but we do have choice about our faith, and we can build that through the Word of God. We can believe and take confidence in the Word, and then act on that. And we can be a giant, and we should strive to be a giant of faith, because that will allow God to use us more, and also will help the people around us. Like you were saying about the older generation is inspirational to the younger ones, so we can inspire families. You really want to get your family to heaven, so if your faith is weak, there's less chance they'll make it.
Right.
But if your faith is the faith of a giant, it's a lot more likely that they're going to latch on to that faith, build their own faith, and your children are going to be children or grow up to be adults of faith. So that's the first lesson. Caleb was the real giant.
On top of that, one thing I noticed is just looking at it from an earthly perspective, when you consider when we're introduced to him in the book of Numbers and him essentially claiming we should be taking the land. And then he has to spend, and we've talked about this in previous studies, it's 40 years wandering the wilderness, waiting for his generation to die off before he's able to go claim his inheritance, which rightfully does. And then in chapter 14, he has that confidence, give me this mountain. There was no hesitation, like you said. I think spunk is probably a great word
I like that.
for Caleb. But at the same time, if we were to say anyone deserved for something to be given to them with ease, I think Caleb would fall into that category. Yet God still essentially makes him work for the prime real estate that he desired. And I read something in a commentary, and I'm going to just paraphrase it, but our past deliverances should still shape our future or our present and future faith.
Right.
I think we live in I was talking to my friend yesterday a little bit, and we live in a society that it moves so fast that it's one of those things where you kind of just live the day and then you move on to the next. And there's, I'm not saying that's all wrong to seize the day. Jesus made that point. Tomorrow's evils will take care of themselves. Live in the present. And we also don't want to, get stuck looking in the rear view as well. But there is a sense, and David did it when he fought Goliath. He made the point that God, I killed the lion. God delivered me or allowed me to defeat a lion and a bear. So I'm going to take that past deliverance, and it's going to take me into this battle. Caleb does the same thing. He's had victories up until this point, and these deliverances, no doubt, gave him that confidence to take this mountain. But so I guess the point I'm trying to make is one, don't forget all that God has done. Take time to reflect on that, but put it in its proper place. It's not a reason or a moment to rest on our laurels or get complacent, but it is meant to shape our faith now and in the future. For lack of a better term, it's meant to drive us further. Caleb, I have no doubt that the reason Abraham was able to exude the faith that he did when he took Isaac up on the mountain was because of everything God had done before up until this point. He had that faith in that moment because he remembered everything God had done before. And I think Caleb's doing the same thing here.
And I see an application to take that one step further. He not only had gained confidence from those battles, he had gained experience.
Right.
So you think about, he's going against giants, no doubt men of war. They fought before, they know what they're doing. He's not a neophyte himself. He's been in battles. He was part of the armies that conquered all those 7 nations of Canaan, and now he's come home, and he's at the end of that battle. The soldiering that he will do in his life. This is the last battle. He's 85 years old. So that experience helped him to be capable to do that. So there's 2 applications of that. One is, we want to do the small things well today because they prepare us to do bigger things tomorrow. Point. You might say, well, this isn't, nobody's going to notice if I do this, but you do it well, you gain some experience. And then when you come to the next situation, you say, okay, well, I can take that. I need to add to it. I need to develop it, but I know a part of this already. The second application is with parents and children. And a third application, which I'll parallel here, is elders and members. So you have parents who have their children. They want to train them to be workers in the kingdom, to be fruitful citizens in society. So put in their path some assignments. Not big things at first, but you have this assignment. I expect you to do a good job. If you have any trouble, let me know and I'll help you. So do this today and tomorrow, and you get in the habit of it. And then expand their assignments and say, okay, now we're going to, you've been responsible for this chore. Now you're going to be responsible for, let's say, a son. You've been a part of our devos, but tomorrow night, I want you to lead the devo. You're going to lead the singing. I've never led singing before. Well, it's our family, and I'll be singing with you. So then he gets the confidence there, and then it's singing night at church. Go ahead, son. You can pick out your song. I've never done this. Well, you lead singing at home all the time. You can do this. Well, I'll try.
That's a good
and then
point.
he's able to do it. So you develop. And then he may lead in front of 1,000 people when he's an adult because of those smaller victories. Same thing with elders. Elders always need to be looking for future elders and future deacons. And good leaders do not do everything themselves, even though it's easier. Like parents, it's easier for them just to do everything rather than wait for their children to get it done, and they may not be capable of doing it very well, and so you have to go behind them, and but you put yourself into your children and you're patient with them because they need to know how to do it.
Right.
And the same thing is with elders and members. They just say, well, I'll just go do it. It'll take longer to explain it to so-and-so. And then, but you explain it. You say, I'm counting on you. And then that frees you up also to do, a lot of times your elders are really busy. And they're working a job and they have family lives and they have church responsibilities. And sometimes if they're doing the things that others could do, the thing that gets dropped is the shepherding and the visiting.
That's a good point.
And the Bible teaching. Those are harder things to do, but leaders should do the hard things first, because those things won't get done if they don't do them because that's their assignment. So I think you see that here with Caleb. He had experience that gave him confidence that prepared him for the new battle.
Right. No, that's good. My wife actually, big advocate of putting our children in situations where they have to deal with conflict on their own. They have to have the difficult conversations at times. And I think you're absolutely right. It is easier just to advocate for them themselves, but it eventually gets to the point where they need to learn it, and
they can't hide behind mama's coattails forever.
Absolutely, and asking a teacher for grace in some area, or dealing with a friend in conflict, allowing our children to do that puts them in a position to do it later on in adult life, not just in careers and social life, but also within the church. And the church has conflict, awkward situations, and usually the ones that are able to stand up in those situations are a great benefit to the church, because
peacemakers.
There's some who aren't willing to do that. So,
and if you just let things go and don't deal with them, then a little leaven is going to leaven the lump. It's going to grow. You want to, and those hard conversations help people go to heaven.
Absolutely.
And that's the big picture. It's not, well, I might offend him. It's, I don't want to go with him to judgment and not having tried to help him, and that's a two-way street, next time, next month, next year, it may be he at my door, instead of, because he's trying to help me go to heaven. So, as long as we can it's just not easy to go to heaven. The devil doesn't make it easy, but we can help each other. And that love requires, like parents, we have to have hard conversations with our children sometimes. My dad used to say, I'd rather take a beating than do, that was one of his sayings. And I know what he means now. I don't think I would rather do anything else but have to do this, but this is what's required. Those hard conversations, it's really a part of love.
Absolutely. Galatians 4:16. Am I therefore your enemy because I tell you the truth?
That's right.
And I think it's Thomas Sowell that one time made the point, if you want to help others, you tell them the truth. If you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear.
Oh, that's a great
absolutely.
quote.
And so,
wow.
Good thoughts.
All right, let me go on to verse 17. This is where the title that we gave the chapter comes from. And so 16, he said, I'll give you my daughter if you conquer this city. So 17, Othniel, that we're going to read about in Judges. He's the first of the judges. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, so his nephew, took it and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, to wife. So he kept his promise. Now, a lesson that we observe here, the second on our list on your screen there, is an application of the literal interpretation of the verse. Men should be willing to fight for their wives. Othniel did exactly that. He went into battle. He had the opportunity to marry this daughter, and he wanted to, so he fought for her, and then that he was awarded her. Of course, that's not our culture. That's not something that happened today, but in that patriarchal society and under the Old Testament, you have the fathers and parents heavily involved in who children marry anyway. So, this is not that unusual. And you think about just from from Caleb's standpoint, and I suppose from Achsah's perspective too. When he said this, he was guaranteeing that his daughter was going to marry a bold man, a courageous man.
That's a good point.
A fighter, and a successful man, because all of those were required even to get to the point where he could come back and say, "Okay, I did what you said." And she had a lot to admire in him, not only that he wanted to marry her and thus was willing to put his life on the line to do it, but she could admire his ability, his wisdom, and his follow-through, which would also bode well for their marriage. Those three things would make a much better husband than someone, that didn't have those characteristics. So men should be willing to fight for their wives. I think that probably pretty obvious, the application there, but sometimes it can get to the point where they fight with their wives instead of fighting for their wives. That's unhealthy. So you want to be a team against the world and not let anything come in and divide you one from another. So if someone says something negative about really be true either way, about your spouse, well, am I going to defend her or him? Certainly never speak ill of your spouse.
Right.
To your church friends, or whatever. If you have things you're dealing with, then deal with them, and if you need counseling, then obviously put everything on the table in that situation, but don't attack you're supposed to love her as your own body and vice versa. So fight for, not fight with or fight against your spouse.
Good thought. I like how you made the point that he ensured that his daughter was marrying a bold individual. Growing up, dated, in the dating world, the one thing that seemed it was always hounded on me by my parents, and my wife and I have tried to take that into our parenting of our children, is essentially they expected to see whoever I was dating at church at some point.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And when it got to the point that a girlfriend was not willing to do that, then that's when the advice, I'll just say it that way, began to come. And I think, from that, just a parenting standpoint on that thought on Caleb is, when we make Christianity and God and his will a priority in our children's dating lives, we're doing the same thing that he did. And we're ensuring that at the very least that stays in their mind as they date someone and then get into the ages where they start to marry. So that's a excellent thought.
Let's think about a third lesson. It's from this same section, but the next verse. Let me read the verse and then we'll draw out the lesson. So, verse 18. And it came to pass as so that's Axa, she's now married to Caleb, her father. She's now married to Othniel, rather. Her father's Caleb. And so she receives, a dowry or inheritance from her father to give them a head start on their new marriage, their new home. And it came to pass as she came unto him that she moved him, that is Othniel, to ask her father a field. And she lighted off her ass or donkey, and Caleb said unto her, "What wouldest thou?" So I'm not sure what's going on in verse 18. There's one of two things, it seems to me. Either one, she tried to get Othniel to talk to her father, and maybe he was reluctant to, or maybe he didn't have an opportunity to. So the first one is she just takes the ball in her own hands and takes care of it because he didn't get around to it or didn't want to do it. That's the negative one. I think the more positive way to look at that is that they had talked about it and she had suggested it, but then Caleb ends up coming, she's with Caleb, her father, and she just goes ahead and asks him, but either way, he asked her, what do you want? What wouldest thou? What can I do for you? And, who answered, she answered, "Give me a blessing. For thou hast given me a south land, a parched land." I think some translations have there. "Give me also the springs of water." And he gave her the upper springs and the nether or lower springs. So there's more than one lesson there. But let me put this on the screen so if someone wants to make these notes in his or her Bible, they can. Number 3, as leaders of families, husbands should listen to and honor the request of their wives. Not a tyrant situation, but a partnership. Now, there is authority there, and there is the husband's the head of the wife. We understand the scriptures teach that, but what kind of head is that? Compassionate, informed, helpful, loving, with agape love that seeks the best for the other person and not selfishness. I think all those things would definitely be the case. In this case, as leaders of families, husbands should listen to. So she came to him and said, I've been thinking about something.
Right.
Would you ask my father? We need some more property. We need a field. Maybe she was thinking first about planting a crop, a garden, support their family. We need some property to do that. We don't have that. So she's looking not to avoid work, but to work and to be willing to lay the groundwork for a successful future. We need while right now we're beginning our marriage, then we're going to need to put the pieces in place for what we'll need. And then also she saw that there was a problem. We're going to have a garden. We're going to need to have water, and if we're going to have livestock, we're going to need water. So water is essential, especially in that part of the world, because it's very arid, and especially the farther you go down toward Egypt, the drier it becomes. So she's thinking, and he didn't just dismiss it and say, you don't know what you're talking about. He did not say, well, I'll get around. Maybe he did say this, but he doesn't say in the text he said it, well, I'll get around to it. That could be, if that first interpretation is right, that could be the attitude he took. But I like to believe that he listened to her and they were approaching their lives as partners.
Right.
To honor the request of his wife. And certainly that's the case. 1 Peter 3:7 says to husbands to dwell with them according to knowledge. Knowledge requires communication. It also requires listening, and that's a part of communication, but it also requires him being willing to look from her perspective. Men and women are just different. They just look at the world differently. They look at the same set of circumstances. One comes away with one impression or one thought, and the other a different one, maybe even an opposite one. So one teacher I had said that verse, 1 Peter 3:7, is telling each husband to get a PhD in one woman, his wife. Know her inside out. Listen to her. Know what she's thinking before she even has to say it. And you see older couples and they finish each other's sentences, and they rely on each other for certain bits of information. Like he doesn't remember things that he knows she knows it, so he just will ask her. Same thing with, well, he knows how to do that. I don't know how to do that. They're a team.
Right.
That's what you see developing here in a young marriage, I think.
Oh, that's a good point. I learn a lot from my wife, just in every day. And you, like you mentioned, there's an authority structure set up within the home, but it's not a domineering authority. I think the best way you make decisions is a partnership. But when it comes down that a decision has to be made, then the man obviously should step up.
He's the tiebreaker.
Absolutely.
If it's a tie, you don't know which way to go. Also, it's a responsibility. The weight of decision making, it is an advantage or an honor, but it's also a responsibility because you want to get it right, and then you have the consequences of getting it wrong if you did.
That's a good point.
So it's both. It is an honor to be in that position, but if he does it right, he's going to feel a weight, because he wants to do well for his family and for his spouse. So.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm with you. I think this is more of she probably thought of this. There have been many times where I've been like, well, this is what's going to happen. And then, my wife brings something up and, well, you're right. I haven't even thought about that. That's just, they look at things differently. And and they approach things differently. So she may have thought of this and brought it to him. And hopefully, I'm kind of with you on the positive side of this. He's, that's a good thought. I didn't think about that. Let's go with this. And she was absolutely right in that standpoint. So excellent thought.
I think the next lesson is in verse 19 that we read there, which is Caleb's response to his daughter. I really like first his attitude in 18, the last part. What wouldest thou? Not what can you do for me, but how can I help you? And parents generally and naturally have that attitude if they're good parents. They always want to help. And, but here you see Caleb at this particular time in the family life. They've made a transition. He's been responsible for her, and she's been in his home, and now that's changed. She's gotten married, and his role has shifted. He's no longer so much in the guidance and leadership role. He's more in a supportive role. And so when he sees her, I picture him as smiling. Here's his daughter. He's not getting to see her as much as he used to, and the first thing he asks is, how can I help? What can I do?
Right.
And that mindset is the mindset of God. He always is ready to help. And he's our Father. We're fathers. If we're blessed to be fathers, then we want to be like our Heavenly Father. So I like the question first because it demonstrates the attitude of the Father. But then I also like a couple of things about Axa here. One is her boldness. She doesn't hem and haw. She knows what she wants in life. Give me a blessing. We should seek out blessings, not for selfishness, but she is now a wife, so she's responsible to a husband. She has responsibilities. They're working together to support themselves, to have a living, have a life. And no doubt before long, they'll have children. So she's in a new role. She's trying to set everything up to be good in the role that she has to play. She said, I need a blessing. I need to put these things together. And she's found someone that she knows wants to help her,
right.
And that is in a position to help. He's got it. He's got the field, and he can do without the field. He can give it to her. So I love that she's bold, and I know that she knows where she wants to go in life. It's really sad. Sometimes you see this, and maybe all of us went through a little bit of this, but sometimes young people just seem lost. We're just floating around, drifting, this thing one, this thing tomorrow, another thing. If they had gotten on a path, they could be pretty far down the path, but they've not gotten anywhere because they went a little bit on this path, a little on that one, a little on that one. She knows where she wants to go.
Right.
That's admirable. And some of that has to be, some of that is the part of the young person, but some of it can be instilled by the parents. I think maybe one reason why we have some of this in our generation is there's so much divorce, and they're bounced from pillar to post, this weekend with one, next weekend with another, and everybody's just trying to win the favor of the child, because of the situation. They don't want to be the bad parent, and and the child grows up and they don't have any direction because they've never had that consistent influence in their life and consistent vision put in front of them, to make them mature. So anyway, I like those two things about her. Now, the next thing I see in verse 19 is she says, give me a south land. You have given me a south land. I guess you could take that as she's complaining, but to see it positively, it's just the reality. Here's what I'm dealing with. I've got a south land. There's not necessarily an implication that you did me wrong here.
Right.
It's just that I need something in addition to it because of my circumstances.
Right.
So give me also springs of water. Now, our next lesson is the second sentence of verse 19. And he gave her the upper springs. All right, if it ended there, well, that's a happy ending, isn't it?
Better request.
But he also gave her the nether springs. So that brings us back to our fourth lesson in this chapter, which is, fathers like God give more than their children ask. You know, when you think about our Father in heaven, there are different answers to our request. Probably the most frequent one is yes. He gives us what we ask for. But he also says no. What good parent doesn't say no sometimes? And God certainly is a loving parent. You know, we must confess that sometimes we've asked for things that later we thought, ooh,
Yeah.
I didn't need that, you know. God knew it. And so sometimes his no's are, in fact, the older I've gotten and learning more about prayer, the most important thing to pray is thy will be done.
Absolutely.
You know, that's the most important thing you can say, because I don't want what I'm asking for if God doesn't think I need it. And so no is an answer that I covet. If I got it right, then I covet yes. But I think all of us, especially as we get older, we think, I don't know everything. You know, I certainly trust God's judgment over mine. So there's yes, there's no. A third answer is later.
Yep.
You know, maybe your child's about to turn 16 and says, I want a car. And you know the maturity level of your child, and maybe you also know that he needs to learn responsibility. You know, well, we'll see about that, but you need to get a job and start, earning enough money to put gas in that car or to pay insurance on that car. Even if it is the car itself is a gift, you're still going to have upkeep and responsibilities, or you may have to make the payments. You know, parents do that differently. But either way, you didn't say no. You just said later. You know, we'll get there, but not today. And you might do that because you don't really think that he's mature enough to drive a car, you know, and not wreck it or be injured or injure someone, but also maybe just to teach maturity. So later is an answer, and God sometimes he will wait. There's another reason why God sometimes waits, not just because we might not be ready for it, but because we might not be grateful for it if we got it right off. You know, spoiled kids get everything they want whenever they want it, but how do they turn out? Well, usually not as well as they should have. You later wish they had. But if you teach children, you know, you have to work for what you get, and you have to be patient, you have to be respectful, and you have to be grateful. All those kind of things don't come at the end of a life of give me and get, give me and get, give me and get all the time. So here, God sometimes says, wait. And then when we finally get it, it was like, so thankful. I'm so grateful. I'm going to thank God for this when I might not have even considered, you know, thanking him or thought of it before. And then another thing that God says in answer to prayer is he gives us more than we ask for. That's what you see here in the example of Caleb. But you also see it with God and Solomon. You know, Solomon asked for wisdom, 1 Kings 3. And God was so impressed with that. He liked that request a lot. And he said, well, okay, I'll give that to you. And if you'll be faithful, I'll also give you riches, wisdom. Well, I'll give you wisdom, and I'll give you riches. I'll give you a long service or a long kingdom. Well, Solomon, he dropped the ball later, but he still reigned for 40 years, you know, and he was very rich man, and he was the wisest man. So God gave him more than he asked for. And as parents, we want to not be stingy. We want to be generous, and we want to be like God. Now, God is wise, as we just noted, and not just giving to the detriment of the receiver.
Right.
But sometimes parents, I haven't seen this much in Christian parents, but it certainly is true in the world, where there's just selfishness toward the children they brought into the world, you know, and maybe it's a drug problem, and maybe it's a drinking problem. Maybe it's just a selfishness that they want to spend everything on themselves, and the poor children don't have even the necessities or don't have any advantages. So I think you see here the kind of father that everybody wishes that she had or he had.
Absolutely.
All right, that gets us down through verse 19. That's the end of what I wanted to read in this section, but I want to go down now back to our outline of chapter 15. So we've covered the first two sections, Judgment's Judah's borders, and then Caleb's victory. And now this largest section, we're only going to just skim over because it's a list of the cities that fell within the property of Judah. And there's some value in studying that, but I'm going to move on from it and focus on the last lesson, which is from verse 53. And now verse 63, where there's a but. They conquered a lot of victories. Verse 20 through 62. So that's 38 or 42 verses of victories. But then verse 63, as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out. But the Jebusites, there's our but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem unto this day. Whenever the book was written, it was still the case. They hadn't corrected the problem years later. Now, on the screen here, I've highlighted the word with. They dwell with the children of Judah. And we're going to have this same idea in the next two chapters, where you have failure to complete the job, which is going to be the background of the book of Judges. You know, if they had done everything God said to do in the book of Joshua, you would not have the dark ages in the book of Judges, because these problems these chickens are going to come home to roost, or this harvest that's being planted now is going to come to fruition later. So there's one last lesson here, and I'll get your thoughts about this. But lesson number 5 in Joshua 15 is winning many victories is good, but one defeat can sour them all. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's verses 20 to 62, many victories. One verse of defeat. One city, Jerusalem, soured it because it ended on a sour note. You know, I really wish this chapter had ended at verse 62 and we wouldn't have to talk about this, you know. Right. But there's value in seeing what not to do as well as seeing what to do. Now, let me go into the background of Jerusalem just a little before we talk about the spiritual application here. Of course, Jerusalem is AKA Mount Zion, mountain. It's a very difficult place to conquer. After it becomes the capital of the Jews, it was attacked many times. But as far as I can tell, it was never taken directly unless they had left the gates open. Mm-hmm. And breaching that city wall on top of that mountain, really difficult. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't possible, because God would have made it possible if they had fought. But from a human standpoint, they're like, how in the world can we do this? You know, and they just finally just gave up, said, we'll just live with it. Well, that is a problem, because their influence is going to come out of that city and among God's people. But we can see a little bit of the why there, even though we don't agree with their conclusion, which was we can't do it. Now, let me give you a beginning of an application. Then maybe I know you'll have something to add to it. But you think about Ezekiel 18 here, which talks about a man who serves God faithfully, and then at the end of his life, iniquity comes back. He falls away. That text, this is about verse 20. That text says that all the good that he's done will be forgotten.
Right.
Because at the end, he died in rebellion to God. And then it also has the positive that a man can be wicked, but then if he changes at the end, that's what will be remembered, because it's how you die or how you end your life. But you can have someone who's grown up in the church, been a part of a youth group, been active with the congregation, and then, late in life, they fall for sin. They get discouraged and quit and get mad at somebody and just quit the Lord, or maybe he forsakes his wife for somebody else because he gave into that temptation, or she or husband, after so many years of faithful service. So you can have one failure that can cancel out a whole lot of victories. I'm not saying that either one of those could not come back, repent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are going to be consequences and damages to either of those probably that will be challenging, but they can still go to heaven. But a lot of times when people fall away at that stage, they don't come back because they don't have a lot of time to come back, for one, if they're at the end of life. So that's sort of what I see in that verse. Talk to me about what you see.
No, I think you're right. It's like the old adage, trust is earned in drops, but lost in buckets. And I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's when you mentioned the word "but" here, and you said that all these victories and all these lands, but that one failure ends up plaguing the nation. Essentially just throughout its history up until 70 AD for if you want to put a date on it. But I think also the key from just a trust or reputation standpoint, and like you said, all the good that a person can do, but one act, it's an unresolved act, if that makes sense, because have men who have done a lot of good things messed up in their lives? Absolutely. But I think what separates those who continue to keep that good reputation versus those who lose the reputation is they allow that act, like you said, to go unresolved.
Yeah.
One thing that, especially as I'm older, that I really admired about my dad was when he did make a mistake, he was very obvious in fixing it, whether it was with us, because my dad and mom too, but my dad was never too good to come in and apologize for doing something that he felt was wrong. Right. Even if, and I remember a couple times when, well, that's okay, and he goes, no, it's not okay, and I shouldn't have done it, whatever. And that always left an impact with me, through my life is, hey, it's okay to mess up if you're willing to fix it. Not that we should, intentionally mess up, but we are going to mess up. We are going to fall short at times. And there's a way to fix it. And I think that's something here. And I think you're absolutely right. In fact, it's David that ends up going in and finally conquering the land and taking it. And that's why, Jerusalem ended up being the capital of Judah and so forth.
Which does prove it was possible, doesn't
absolutely,
it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think that's an excellent thought. I also think that just, this chapter and the ones is working within God's given limits. Zeal is something that we should have, but it should be bridled by what God has set forth. And I think absolutely, you have them taking what God has commanded them to do. They didn't do it fully, so that, they, for lack of a better term, they fell short on the zeal part. But I think this illustrates this good enough religion that I think is starting to plague the church, and it's definitely hit the religious world as a whole. It's close enough. And then we, with no time to go into the specifics on it, but, when you look at Christ, as particularly in John, when he's hanging on the cross, right before he dies, it makes the point, and I'm just going to paraphrase, seeing that all had been accomplished, all prophecy had been accomplished, he said, I thirst to fulfill it, almost as if he's saying, I thirst, checks that final prophecy before he can give up. If Christ had taken a good enough approach, then you and I have no opportunity at salvation. And I think one thing the Bible has illustrated for us is we'll never attain perfection, but striving for perfection should always be our goal or our motivation. And I think we see one of the pitfalls here for taking that good enough approach.
Ecclesiastes 9:10 says, whatsoever your hand finds to do it with your might. That's the opposite of what you're talking about, good enough religion. Was it Ralph Waldo Emerson. I may have the person wrong, but the quote is, we should aim for the moon, and if we miss, we may at least hit a star.
Right.
So I know that's not good astronomy, as far as the star and the moon, but we see the point. The moon's big and a big target, and we might not get where we aimed, but we'll get further than we would have if we had not aimed.
Right.
So let's give God the best shot that we have.
Right. Well, in athletics, when we would test our vertical jump, that's what we were taught. Pick something that don't pick a spot that you've hit before. Pick the spot above it, and I think that's just a good lesson in life, especially like you mentioned, especially when we come to church, the work of the church. Aim big, and
we have a big God.
Absolutely.
So you're praying to an omnipotent God,
right?
He can do anything. So why do we ask him to do little things?
Right.
Big things are just as easy to him as little things, right?
Absolutely.
So we can dream big, and that means we're going to have to work hard. But God certainly can do great things, and has always demonstrated that with his dealings with his people.
Well, like you mentioned too, thy will be done should be the forethought of all our prayers. To me, that's a sign of trust.
It is.
When all's said and done. I'm going to leave it in your hands, whatever you want and desire to be accomplished and use us for in this capacity. I'm going to leave it to you. Right. And there's no better person to leave it to than God. He has all the answers. He has all the capability. And so,
and all the love.
Absolutely. Right.
He loves me more than I love myself.
That's a good. You're absolutely right.
So there's no risk at all in trusting God. The risk is trusting myself.
Right. Right. And you mentioned the Father. There's nothing more than it's another quote, but there's no one in life that wants you to succeed more than your parents and your father. Mm-hmm. And I think the same applies to God. And you've made that point. No one wants us to go to heaven more than God, right. And that's seen in what He's done. So that's an excellent thought. Well, I enjoyed that.
I did too. It's a good chapter.
Yes, sir. So join us next time as we start chapter 16.